press record, and welcome everybody to the weekly leadership roundtable. So we are all here to talk about one thing and one thing only: humanizing transformation, so we can accelerate success and we can achieve agile at scale. So I will share my screen and start with today's session. I don't know whether anybody actually saw my little provocation out to LinkedIn on Monday, but I put out a little poll and I said, is change management dead, alive, or both? And it was quite incredible. It has gone ballistic on LinkedIn with so many people sharing their thoughts and their reflections. And what is quite interesting is that there have been some themes that have come out of that poll, and that's really what I want to talk about today. One theme that came out of that poll was, how do we differentiate between change and transformation? That's not necessarily today's agenda, but I just wanted to share that was one of the two themes that came out. But the second theme that came out is this area of change and transformation that feels so intangible, feels so complex, and doesn't necessarily have a standard structure around it, you know, in the world in terms of framework. And we do, of course, with the Dilyn Way, but it's very, very hard for us to put structure around it. And of course, that thing is all about mindset. So I'm going to take a special look at mindset today. We've talked about it. We have to talk about it every week. But today, what we're going to do is we're going to deep dive into the dimensions of mindset, as opposed to just talking about it as a general theme. And that's the key. That's the key. That's the missing thing in change management. That's the missing thing in the design of successful transformation and change. As always, I start with a little bit of a quote so that we can get those cognitive juices flowing. And I love this from Oxford Economics, that it says that the best and most successful companies are, of course, those that will be able to marry those twin forces of technology and human creativity. Now, really what that is nudging is we have to know the tech in order to survive in our future and to design. So Anna, specifically for you in terms of digital transformation, you've got to be technically focused. You've got to be data focused. But the real success will come from when we marry that with humanity, when we marry that with human creativity. And that's the glue. The missing piece in there is the mindset piece. It's the bit that is, how can I say it? It's the piece of the iceberg that we cannot see. And that's what we're going to look at today. So in order to do that, what we need to be introduced to these 7 dimensions. Now, some of you will be very familiar with these. What I want to do today is, for those of you that are familiar with them, is to give you a refresher in terms of the depth behind the definition. And for those of you who have not seen these 7 mindsets before, then the key thing here is for you to understand that these are the 7 dimensions that together create what the modern worker's mind is, what the modern practitioner's mind is, and what the modern leader's mind is all about. So we have 7 dimensions, 7 mindsets: digital native, the beginner's mind, networked mindset, authentic mindset, data mindfulness, prepared mindset, and the human-centered mindset. And the key thing here really is to try and really understand them as mindsets as opposed to principles. So we could easily look on the left-hand side of this slide and say, oh yeah, digital, I can get that. It's about technology, it's about simplification, it's about doing things faster, it's about analyzing, it's about automating. I get it. Those are things, that's tangible thing. But what does that mean inside the mind, so that, you know, we can start to support people thinking differently? And that's what this is all about. If we can get people to think differently, they will behave differently, they will act differently, they will be open to change, and we can accelerate transformation. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to take us through each one of these and then introduce you to a little technique for how we can start making those shifts in either the design or the delivery of transformation. So mindset number 1, the digital native mind. So when we are thinking like a digital native, what are some of the things that we want to be considering? What are some of the things that we want to be bringing to life? Now, there's a huge amount of depth behind the digital native mindset, but one of the key things that we should be looking to anchor the digital native mindset is really the younger generations. It's those younger generations that are born digital. So the first element of the digital native mindset is a little bit obvious, but it's still worth a reminder. It's about being natural around technology. So if we're in the design and delivery of change and transformation, we want to understand how we're designing experiences that are natural for the human. How do we use tech and data to create natural experiences, intuitive experiences for the user and the human? But then we start to go deeper to the digital native mindset. And this is where it really gets cool. Active activism. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally am Generation X. And the Generation X, we were activists, but we are really talked about as passive activists. So we're the kind of generation that will say, oh, you know what, I didn't like what so-and-so said, or, you know, we might say yes to something in the room, but when we're out of the room, we reflect on it. When we're at the water cooler moment, there might be something else that we're talking about. So there's a duality, there's a polarity in terms of our actions and what's going on inside of our brains. But when you're thinking about a digital native mindset, it's when you are actively active, it's an activism. And what that means is we're bringing values and purpose. So values are the basis of what we design and deliver. Values are the basis of the decisions that we make. And we are purpose driven in how we act. So we're values based and we are purpose driven. So the key thing when we're thinking about the digital native mindset in the design and the delivery of change and transformation, so that we can actually get to that point of accelerated success, is thinking about the technology and the data as intuitive, and thinking about active activism in terms of where are the values and where's the purpose in the design and the delivery. Because so much of what we're seeing now, when you think about younger generations coming in, when we're thinking about talent and recruitment, what we're recognizing in the workplace across all industry, public sector and private sector, is that the employee, the potential employee, is asking, what are your values? What purpose drives your product and your service? How does that manifest within your working environment and within the package that you're given me? So it's really important for us to think about all the different dimensions of that values-based and purpose-driven. So mindset number 2 is what we call the beginner's mind. Now, we work with a lot of organizations that come to us and say, we want to adopt an agile way of working. We want to become agile as an organization. And they have got fantastic training in terms of, you know, Scrum Master, and they might even have organizational SAFe, which is, you know, the agile at scale methodology, being trained at a manager and a leadership level. All of that stuff is happening, but that's training in terms of methodology. But there's so much more to it than that. So much more to it than that in terms of an agile mind. Really, it's better for us, we believe, to be thinking about a modern mind rather than an agile mind, because you can have a modern mindset when you are applying linear and more waterfall projects and programs. It doesn't necessarily have to be an agile project or program to have an agile mind. You can be really modern in anything that you do. So modern mindset. So this second mindset, the beginner's mindset, really broadens out what we mean by agile. And it's about being experimental. It's about recognizing that there is more than one right answer to any problem or opportunity. So when you think about having an idea and then creating a strategy or a plan to deliver and design that idea into a project or program, there's usually very little space between those 2 points. What we want to do with a beginner's mind is put more and more space within those 2 points, so that we are able to create high volume experiments at low risk. So it's thinking about how many right answers are there to this problem or opportunity? How do we act upon those in an experimental way? Super, super important. And of course, micro shifts. So it's getting those micro shifts, because in business as usual, if we can bring experimental, the beginner's mind into the moments of our change and transformation, we're able to bridge the gap between business as usual and the future, instead of having 2 separate plays. So at work, in the organization, or in the system, we really want transformation to be part of business as usual. And the way that we can do that is by micro shifts in daily practice. Now you can see that Elon Musk has been a picture now. Whether you're into him or not is kind of is kind of irrelevant for today's conversation. But what I want to do is I want to introduce you to something that's incredibly important, which is a principle of physics called first principle thinking. And first principle thinking is something that is really connected into this beginner's mind. And what first principle thinking is all about is breaking things down to their fundamental foundational points. So if you think about SpaceX, when Elon Musk had the idea of wanting to expand humanity, wanting to enable humanity to go off planet, and created that moonshot of let's colonize colonize Mars, and to do that we have to get to the moon first. He knew that part of that would be getting rockets into space. And what he did was he looked with his engineers and his strategists to what NASA were doing, because they were the analogous alternative. And what he recognized was that if he was ever going to do it, he'd need so much money, because he'd need $80 billion to create a rocket. And he didn't have that money, even though he's one of the wealthiest people on earth. But he didn't have that to invest. So they couldn't do what NASA were doing. So they had to think about it differently. And as a physicist, in terms of his background, he asked his engineers and his strategists and his designers to apply first principles thinking to the problem. So what he did was he got them in a room and he asked them to break things down to the fundamentals. So rather than looking at all of that process and all of that complexity that NASA were trying to deal with, which made it so incredibly heavy in terms of time and investment, what he asked his team to do is to apply first principles thinking and take it down to its bare minimum. And they came up with about 5 key components that were required to build a rocket. And from those 5 bare bone components, that's when they started to experiment, and that's when they started to design. And they designed something that was 80% cheaper in financial cost to the NASA equivalent. So rather than analogous thinking, what they did was they took something, they broke it down using first principles thinking instead of analogous thinking, and they were able to design with a beginner's mind. So curiosity, multiple right answers, first principles thinking. That's the beginner's mind. That gives you agility. That gives you curiosity. That gives you the ability to respond when there's change, when others are going to react around change. So it's the difference between being responsive versus reactive. Mindset number 3 in this wonderful thing that I'm talking to you about today, the gap, the secret sauce to accelerating change and transformation, is what we call the networked mind. And the networked mind is beautiful, because the networked mind has really got a sense of inevitability about it. Whether we are in a project or program that is change or transformation or not, the system that we are working within, the system that we are a part of, is organically, inevitably changing anyway. But it might be really, really slow. We've got younger generations coming in. We are slowly but surely moving from on-premise technology to cloud technology. We're slowly but surely understanding what platform ways of working are about. And of course, we've had the last 2.5, 3 years of COVID that have accelerated the idea of hybrid working, etc., etc. So the networked mind really can be sort of summarized in the 3 words that you can see here on the left-hand side: flow. Yeah, if we think about the traditional system and structure that most of us are operating in is heavily based on silo and hierarchy. And it's heavily based on silo and hierarchy because data flows up. And data flows up to the people that make the decisions. That's how traditional business was built. But we now know that it's not the leaders at the top of the organization that make the decisions anymore. They're becoming enablers, they're becoming coaches, they're becoming mentors. The decisions are becoming distributed and decentralized throughout the system. So what we need to do in the networked mind is start to think about how do we flow data and human cognition, our ideas, our thoughts, and our words and our conversations. How do we flow them in the system? So when we're thinking about change and transformation, think about flow in terms of data and in terms of human thoughts, ideas, and words. How do we make that flow something that is decentralized and distributed so that it's not going up? And that's a really, really important thing. Rather than thinking about flattening our structures in terms of technical architecture, in terms of organizational structure and process, we should really be thinking about how are we able to decentralize and distribute cognition and data in a way that it can be where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. And the next bit is ecosystem. And the ecosystem really lends itself well to the flow bit. It's creating an ecosystem. So what we're thinking about here is, and I don't know about you, but with a lot of customers that we work with, they say we want to go from 5 key lines of business, Mel, and we want to become a more networked organization. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down these 5 key silos into smaller business units. Well, all the organization is doing is adding complexity and creating a matrix system that is going to be just lots more silos. The better way to think about it is to take an ecosystem rather than a matrix view in our operating models and the way that we design change and transformation. So that's what we mean by ecosystem. So instead of thinking about how do we break down the corporate area of our business into, internal customer and external customer and data expertise, et cetera, stop thinking about what we do and start thinking about who we are. So if we can organize our structures, our organizational systems based on who the people are, and what they need to achieve as opposed to what they need to do, you've got something really special happening. And the final bit about the network mindset is humanity. Humanity, it's tenet number 3, regeneration. How do we bring sustainability? How do we bring the planet? How do we bring purpose back into what we're doing? So being networked means that we have to know about it. Being networked means that we have to be aware of it so that we can bring it into our design of change and transformation. So please, when we're thinking about, driving and leading transformation change, bringing that humanity into design as well as into how we deliver it, being ethical, being values driven, being planet aware is really, really important to us in terms of change and transformation success. Mindset number 4 is the authentic mindset. And those of you that know me talking about the 4th mindset know that I always describe it as a little bit of a yin and a yang. So what do I mean by yin and yang? It's about us being authentically ourselves and allowing other people to be authentically themselves. And if we're going to do that, we need to have psychological safety. If we're going to do that, we need to have transparency. If we're going to do that, we need to be supportive and mentoring and supportive and nurturing. There's so much going on here. So this is where organizational development, that's where we should be working with people in OD, where we should be working with people in HR and learning and development, where we should be working with internal comms, because to create spaces and environments that allow people to share their true thoughts without any recourse has to have that sense of safety around it. So it's really important for us to really think about that. Transparency, how can we make data open? How can we be open first before closed? And if you're thinking about things like governance, how we create governance, it's really good to go and have a look at some of the principles of agile governance. And some of the principles of agile governance hint at us being open first and then closing as we need to for the safety of the human. Whereas the majority of governance in traditional environments is closed first and you have to prove to open. So it's really starting to think about how we can have an open by default way of thinking and operating at the beginning. So let's be open and work out what needs to be closed or prove what needs to be closed as opposed to the other way around. And the final thing that I've got here is you. It's so important for every individual within the organization to have the space and time to explore their own authenticity. And that is one thing that we tend not to do, spend time or investment on when it comes to change and transformation, and we should. It feels like it's a heavy investment. It feels like it might be something to slow down success, especially when we've got linear targets and objectives that have been placed upon our projects and programs. But I can promise you, allowing people the space and time to understand who their USU is will accelerate change when we're in the throes of it. So attention, where our focus is, open governance, transparency and authenticity, and your USU. It's really important for us to think about authenticity and transparency. The fifth mindset is data informed and data mindfulness. Now, I talk a lot about data mindfulness because I have a real passion for this mindset. I don't know what kind of change and transformation environment you're working on, but we tend to talk about data as a competency. We tend to talk about data in terms of literacy. We tend to talk about it as something scary in terms of cybersecurity and personal data protection and privacy. And those things are all absolutely correct. But what we ought to be doing is we ought to be bringing humanity into the story here as well, and recognizing and helping the humans in our system realize that they have always had a connection to data, because we are all data. How we perceive the world around us in our personal life and in our professional life is all based on data. Humanity historically has grown and evolved based on how we interpret and share data. The data that I receive, the data that I create, the data that I change and amend, the data that I share, the data that I delete or archive. Thinking about that pathway of data and how that plays a part in the design and delivery of change and transformation is super important. Don't fall into the trap of thinking data is a capability or data is something to do with cybersecurity and privacy alone. If we can bring the story of data in line and in sync with who we are as a human being, we are halfway there. It's half of the battle. The penultimate mindset is the prepared mindset. Slightly dovetails into mindset 2, the beginner's mindset, but this is really where we're thinking about the future. This is really where we're thinking about what's happening around us. So as you can see there, the second bit that I've put in on the left-hand side when you're thinking about the prepared mindset is frame of reference. Every practitioner, every change and transformation specialist, every modern leader should have an absolute devotion to evolving their frame of reference. And that frame of reference is how we look forward into the future. What do we understand about emerging technology? Not just new technology, but emerging technology. You know, if we're involved in a project or a program that's bringing Office 365 or Oracle into our organization or SAP into our finance and HR systems, they are new technologies that are already mainstream. They're new to us, but they're mainstream in terms of their ability to affect change. But there is also emerging technology, and it's the technologies that are not yet mainstream. NFT, metaverse, quantum, 4D as opposed to 3D printing. All of these emerging technologies, they're not for us to be thinking about science fiction. They're for us to be really understanding the strategic trajectory of where they might be. And a really great place to go for that is the work of Kevin Kelly, who is also the editor here in the UK of the Wired magazine. But Kevin Kelly is a futurist that talks fantastically well around this sense of emerging technology. Really, really cool. So really understanding the difference between new technology and emerging technology is one thing. The second thing is, how do we habitually expand and evolve our frame of reference in terms of looking forward and outward? And finally, how do we become prepared? And if we're doing those two top things, we're probably 99% there in terms of prepared. But what we mean by being prepared is this: when change happens around us, instead of saying, let's stop, instead of saying we need to retrench back into what our old ways, or we need to do what we've always done, just better, faster or smarter, focus on improvement, what we do is we lean into creativity, we lean into innovation. When change happens, that's when innovation spikes globally. And innovation spikes where people have got the courage to lean into innovation. when they have got the courage to do so. And to have the courage to do that needs that new versus emerging technology knowledge and that frame of reference, because that frame of reference gives you resilience. So that's super important. And the final mindset is the human-centered mindset. And the human-centered mindset is something that we've talked about a lot, right? It's all about humanizing transformation. So every week I'm talking about how we bring the human into what we do. Humanity and values driven, I've already talked about those two things, but the one thing I want to introduce as another concept today is this idea of hyper-personalization. And if we look to the consumer world, we can see that hyper-personalization is something that has got a huge amount of investment. It's talked about a lot. So what do we mean by hyper-personalization? Well, the image that you can see here on the slide gives you a little bit of an indication of what it is. And we've all experienced hyper-personalization when we've been online and we've looked at something, we've searched on Google for something, and all of a sudden, within the next few minutes, when we're on Amazon looking to buy something completely different, you can see on the right-hand side that there's some marketing adverts that are for the thing that you were searching on Google the day before. This sense of hyper-personalization. How do we track and follow what the activities of our humans are in order for us to build a picture of what their preferences are, so that we can start to predict what they want, to predict what they're going to do, to predict their needs in order for us to design those needs. So hyper-personalization has got a lot to do with data, it's got a lot to do with monitoring and tracking, and it's got a lot to do with the predicting the needs of others. And this is really important for us, even if we're in public sector, to start to think about predicting the needs of our citizens in the future, to design services that are starting to take the demand away. So demand management is something that is absolutely amazing when you're thinking about hyper-personalization as well. So those, very briefly, are the 7 mindsets, how we should be thinking as individuals, as workers, as specialists of change and transformation, as modern leaders. And the key thing is this, is trying to get consistent across all 7 of them. If we can be consistent across all 7, something magical happens. We get known as being a modern individual rather than being an expert of domain. And that's really important, because oftentimes when we're working with groups of people and we put them through profiling, what we notice is that they have got spikes of maturity in 1 or 2 of these mindsets, but they are undernourished in other mindsets. And what that does in terms of how the outside world perceives you is they perceive you in the purity of what you're putting out there, which is that area of expertise. And you therefore get labeled for the domain that you are driving and the domain that you are operating in. And the better way to do it is to really think more broadly about how you can balance these 7 mindsets, so that you're seen first, in terms of who you are, as opposed to what you do. These 7 mindsets also are dynamic. It's really important to recognize that everything that I've talked to you about today in terms of giving you a very, very high level definition is always moving. It's that these guys are always moving, because the world around us is moving and maturing. Technology is maturing, data is maturing. Our expectations and the choices that are presented to us as human beings inside the organization and outside the organization are constantly evolving. Economics and society is constantly evolving. So it's really important for us to keep check of what we understand and how we would define each one of these mindsets. Really important. And the final point I want to just raise with everybody in terms of the 7 mindsets is this, that they are complementary. You know, if we are agile, if we are delivering change using a methodology like ProSci, if we have got, if we're in the world of manufacturing and Kaizen is our thing, that's all fine. But none of those methodologies really help us and support us to identify mindset and allow mindset shift and to design mindset shift. And these guys will help you. So the thing for me is just to ensure that whatever methodology or approach you're using in change and transformation, it is always really easy for you to apply in parallel the 7 mindsets of modern business and modern leadership. Now, I mentioned to everybody that I wanted to just give you a little bit of a look-see into how we shift mindset. Now, I have simplified it to one little technique here. Can I just say, yes, there is complexity behind it. There is, there is a lot more to mindset shift than just what I've got on here. But this is just a way for you to start thinking about it when you're designing for change and transformation and when you're delivering change and transformation. There are 3 states to every human being's life and practice in work. There are the words and actions and the movements that we take. And that stuff is all visible for us. It is truth that we can track. It is things that we hear and see, and we can document them. They are factual. Then there is the dimension of behavior, which is our emotions, is the energy and how we show up, our presence. That too is visible and therefore a truth that we can track and we can monitor. But then behind that, below the iceberg, is the complexity of how we think. And there's no way that we can ever know what an individual is thinking unless we are able to inquire, unless we are able to give them the situation, give them the safety and the open space to share how they're thinking. And that thinking is about their rituals, their values, and their purpose, what drives them. So if you think about these 3 elements, these 3 states that drive our practice, think about it like an iceberg. We spend most of our time on what we can see, actions and behavior. But actually, what's below the iceberg, that complexity, is ritual, values, mindsets, and thought. And that's where we really want to start placing more and more of our thought, more and more of our design, and more of our delivery. And this is what we call a flow path. It's a very, very, very simple mechanic, and it allows us to really focus in on the human as a person rather than as a persona that is an assumed identity. So if we look at this particular flow path here, what you can see is, above the iceberg is what is observable to us, yeah? And below the iceberg is what is not observable to us, which is why we need to apply inquiry so that we can get the truth, so that we can allow that individual the space to share. So there's a little flow path here as an example to share with you. And this is a real example that I was working on with a leader yesterday. So this individual leader is creating her flow paths for her own mentoring, her own development. And one of the things that she noticed was that she is always, and people say this to her, they observe in her that what she tends to do is create group gatherings. She tends to create workshops and forums, etc., etc., etc. So it's group gatherings that people observe in what she does. How she does that, how she creates those safe group gatherings, is by creating inclusive and open spaces. And she uses different channels to do that, like workshops and forums. Now, that's all stuff that's observable for us. And that's the kind of data that we should be monitoring in our change and transformation, the data that we should be capturing before we start designing anything. But as well as that data, we also need to understand why she does that, and why is it that that's how she does it. And this is where inquiry comes in. Explain this to me. Tell me about that. And then we uncover the real depth of this flow path. And what I uncovered yesterday with this individual leader is that change is accelerated when there is a collective voice and ownership. This is her belief. This is what she believes. This is a value that she holds dear to her. So if we're designing something in an organization that might be technologically driven, or a new product and service, if we know that this is the mindset, the value, the purpose that drives this individual, then it might change how we communicate transformation to her, or indeed how we decide to deploy that change and transformation. So understanding the why is really important. And what I've done here is I've popped another couple of flow path examples for everybody to have a look at. So there's another one here, which is a flow path around somebody in terms of how they operate in social media. So they're active on LinkedIn. That is an action that we can observe. We can document that data. How they do it is that they tend to like other people's posts, that their comments are always supportive in terms of how they show up, that they're sharing articles that they think are valuable using in the words that they describe. All of that stuff is observable to us, but until we inquire with that person, we won't know why those actions and how those actions are exercised. We won't know why. And the key thing when you delve into this individual's flow path is their explanation, their story is that they believe that sharing data helps acknowledge others, and action spreads value quicker when we are when we are sharing, when we are adding value. And that's just such a beautiful one. I've popped another one in here as well, just in terms of in the workplace. And this might be something that you can recognize in a leader. And it might be a leader that is somebody that you follow and you recognize as a really good modern leader, asking open questions. You know, what a great action. How do they ask those questions? They do it in a nurturing way. They do it in an inclusive, in a non-threatening way. And they come across as really interested and curious. That's how they show up. That's how they behave in terms of the action. But still, we don't know why. Yeah, that's what we can observe above the iceberg, what's below the iceberg. And the belief system that's below the iceberg for this individual is that there is so much wealth in what's inside people's thoughts, and so much of it gets lost in process and formality. And what this individual believes in is open questioning done in a nurturing and inclusive way allows what's inside people's heads to come out, so that wealth can come into the workplace. So that's a beautiful belief system behind that particular flow path. So those are three very, very simple flow paths. And all I really would ask of you today is to just start thinking about those flow paths for yourself, and start to, practice with inquiry questions when you observe what and how in others. Ask them, explain a little bit more about that. Tell me about that action that I've just observed. Just getting inquiry gives us the depth of people's personal why. That gives us the ability to see what's below the iceberg. So that brings me to the end of today's weekly roundtable. So talking about the 7 mindsets, it's that bit that we seem to miss, is understanding the 7 mindsets, and then being able to observe those mindsets in others, to understand and uncover those mindsets in others. And if we can understand a now point, we can then create a future point, and we can design from there, which is really important. And all of this stuff is, of course, part of the Leadership and Practitioner Academy, which is all about humanizing transformation to get to that point of agile at scale. And clearly, if we put the human in the heart of everything, we know that we're going to accelerate success. The biggest challenge and pain becomes the absolute biggest success factor. They're 2 things that are just yin and yang. The biggest challenge is the biggest success factor, and that's all about human and mindset and humanity. So what I want to do now is just to share with you all my little banana skins. And today, as always, I've got a couple of banana skins for us. So the first one is this: please do not fall into the trap of making assumption when it comes to why people say or do something. We will never be able to understand a person's mindset unless we have inquired. It comes from within. It is what's underneath the water of the iceberg. So inquiry is the only way. So let's not fall and slip on the banana skin of assumption and persona. And equally, when it comes to the 7 mindsets, let's not be okay about having maturity in one or the other. Let's really challenge and commit ourselves to be a generalist across all 7. Spend the time and the commitment to understand all 7 mindsets, because that's when people start to perceive you as a person and a human rather than a label and a job to be done. The job is insignificant to who you are and how you show up within that job. Honestly, even yesterday I was talking with somebody and they were saying, it's amazing, Mel, because what's happened over the last 6 months we've been working together is that I'm starting to create my job and change my job based on who I am, and my label seems to have dropped away, which I just think is a really cool thing. Now, before I close today's session, and we've got a couple of minutes for open mic, the mic that's not working on my camera, I want to announce something to everybody. Next Wednesday, we are going to have a great mindset challenge. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 7 days. We're going to present 7 mindsets so that everybody gets a day of reflection on the mindset. We're going to be launching a video. We're going to be launching some activities. 7 days, 7 mindsets. So if you want to get to know a little bit more about those 7 mindsets for yourself, for others, then join us on the 7-day mindset challenge. So we're going to go through every single one of those 7 mindsets. We're going to share stuff with you. We're going to be there. We're going to have some little activities, and we're going to help everybody that's on the challenge to really understand these 7 mindsets at a deeper level for themselves, and to bring those 7 mindsets into their own design for change and transformation. So the Great Mindset Challenge starts next Wednesday. We're going to be promoting it. Please get on the bandwagon, join us on it. It's going to be fantastic. And therein comes the end of today's session. So we've talked, we've talked a lot today, because I really wanted to share not just the 7 mindsets. I wanted to share a mechanism for observation and design, you know, how we might be able to shift those mindsets with everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing quickly. Let's stay online. We've got a couple of minutes. And I guess the key thing for me now is to ask everybody this one question. How did that resonate with you? What value have you taken out of what you've heard today? Is it the mindsets, and there's 7 of them? Is it the flow paths, or an element of the flow paths? What resonated with you today? Any questions? Let's open the table out a little bit. Silence is golden. Have I given it all? Does that mean I've actually given so much there's no questions?
Mel, I just think it's, you know, it's just going back to that quality, isn't it? It's investing that quality. It's not saying I'm, you know, this is me, I'm over here. It's actually having the cream at the top, and it covers the whole thing, and it's that quality, and that's where that substance comes from. And I think just going through that, every time you go through the mindsets, I find something else. I go, oh gosh, that, and I think that's why these sessions are good, because it just goes, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. So thanks. But yeah, it's the quality of what I do and how I am seen, rather than, as you say, that one domain. So thanks. It's really good.
Oh, no, I like that. And Joanna, what you've mentioned there is something very important, you know, because a lot of the time when we're designing the future for our organizations and our systems, we tend to have a conversation that goes along the lines of this. What do we want our leaders to do? How do we want our leaders to act? What is the ideal worker for X council? And we see it as a single persona that should apply to everybody. And that's where we're wrong. It's about how do we bring uniqueness? And the 7 mindsets allow us to recognize that there are multi-dimensions to every leader, to every worker, to every specialist. It's about uniting on uniqueness as opposed to unifying on persona. Unite on uniqueness instead of unify on persona. And that's a little mantra that I always work on when I'm helping you know, the design of future workforce and leadership programs. And Lorraine, you will know that sense of uniqueness. So absolutely, the element of quality, personal quality. Joanna, I have never worked with a leader or an individual that hasn't had value contribution to the future of a system. And when we are in, you know, because we're all practitioners of change and transformation here on this call, and you know, it's easy to underestimate that the people that we are working and serving, you know, so many of them think that they don't have value. So fear in change isn't just about being familiar and with what I've got. It's also that I might not belong in the future. I might not have a place in the future. And that's wrong as well. So, you know, when you talk about quality, that really resonates with me. And the 7 mindsets at a workforce level allow people to find their value contribution to the future, so that they have got a place of belonging, that they can be okay about it. Cool, thank you for that. Any other thoughts or comments? No? Well, we are actually a couple of minutes over. So I have to say, we are a couple of minutes over on today's session. So what I will do is I will bring today's session to a close. Remember, we've got that 7-day challenge, that 7-day mindset challenge that's going to be launched next week. If you work in change and transformation, and I know everybody on this call does, then that 7-day challenge is going to be a fantastic thing to be a part of. Also, a replay of today's recording will be emailed out to you, obviously, later on today, if not tomorrow. And we have a little sneaky surprise that we're going to be sharing with everybody in the replay email. So all I will do is bid everybody adieu. Have a fantastic day. Think about those 7 mindsets in your own practice. Observe them in other people. And if you see them, give yourself the courage to ask some inquiry questions to see whether you start to habitually uncover mindset. Because action and behavior doesn't give us mindset. Only the person can give us the mindset, right? That's the bit of the iceberg that we can't see. Excellent. I bid everybody adieu. Be safe, be happy, and humanize your transformation wherever you are. And I'll stay online for the next few minutes. If anybody has got any other questions, if you'd like to know about the Leadership and Practitioner Academy, just let me know. Just stick around and I'm here to ask any questions. Otherwise, have a great day, and that recording and wee little bonus will be on its way to you, if not later on today, tomorrow. Thank you everybody for joining, and I'll see you next week. Share and spread the word. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you. Bye.